I'd like to think that some of you might be wondering, what on earth has that reading got to do with the talk today? I have a feeling some of you do wonder what, and you will find out in due course. That is a very dry chapter, isn't it? Without being rude, I bet some of you thinking, I can't even remember what we just read. It is a very dry chapter, and I'm going to suggest to you, and we'll show it right at the end, is one of the most exciting chapters in the whole of the Bible when you read it from a different perspective. Okay. We're going to talk about the joy of baptism. I'll never forget, I was brought up as a Christadelphian, for what that is worth, and I was going out with a young girl from Halifax who was a Christadelphian, and I remember going to the meeting at Halifax, and I think people were getting a bit worried because these two might end up getting married, and he's not a Christadelphian. And I was there in the audience, as it were, listening, and the speaker came up from the floor to speak, and he stood on the platform, as they do in Halifax. And when he'd finished, because Karen was over that side playing the organ and I was sat with her, when he'd finished, instead of walking off the platform and going sitting over there where he was before, he went and sat behind me. I thought, if he says anything to me about, I notice you've not been baptized, I don't know if you feel like I did, but it got on my wick, I'll put it like that. I'll get baptized when I want to get baptized, not when you want me to get baptized, and not when he wants me to get baptized. I'll do it when I want. Mum and Dad didn't say anything to me because they knew my attitude. Karen was playing the organ after the service had finished, and I got a tap on the shoulder, and I turned around and said, hello. She said, I see you haven't been baptized. And your problem is? He says, please don't get baptized because there's pressure on you. You mustn't. Only get baptized because you want to. I was baptized within a fortnight. This reverse psychology. I'm going to talk today, not about me, but one particular individual who I would like to think, and my baptism was joyful. My baptism was here. I can remember bits about it. I can remember who spoke. I remember saying to my dad on the car on the way home, I wanted to come to front and thank everybody for coming, including the 40 or 50 odd people that came from Halifax on a wet, miserable October evening. He says, well, you should have done. Well, I was petrified. I wouldn't dare do it. I remember going there and being baptized. I remember it, but I'm not talking about my baptism. I'm going to talk about one particular baptism. Come with me to the book of Acts, please, chapter 8. And whilst I'm not decrying your baptism or my baptism, if you've been baptized, I wonder if your baptism was as joyful as this man's baptism. This man's baptism was something else. And I'm going to possibly shock you, but I'm going to talk to you about the man himself. And you're going to learn a few things about him, and you'll realize he was a pretty unusual individual. He was very different. He wasn't like a Lancastrian living in Yorkshire, which is bad enough. He had a lot going against him. And when he was baptized, he felt 10 feet tall, if you know what that phrase means. Come with me then to Book of Acts, I think you're there. Chapter 8, please. And I'm going to keep reading and I'm stopping. I might ask you questions and you won't answer them, so I'll answer them for you. Verse 26, the angel of the Lord spake unto Philip. No, stop there, shall we? I'll keep stopping. The name Philip means lover of horses. Whenever in the Greek word you have the word Phil, P-H-I-L, like Philemon or Philadelphia, which doesn't mean lover of cheese, by the way. It means lover of brothers. Phileo means to love, okay? Philip means, which in the Greek is something like Phil Hypsos. It sounds like hippos, Phil Hippos. And it means lover of horses. And a man whose name is lover of horses is very soon going to be asked to go and catch up to a load of horses and go and get on a chariot. And the horses obviously liked him because they stopped at the right time. Philip, the Lord spake unto Philip, saying, arise and go toward the south unto the way that goeth down from Jerusalem unto Gaza, which is desert. And if you didn't know where Gaza was, you should do now, sadly. Okay. So imagine the nation of Israel, which is, of course, debatable by those who wish it wasn't. But Gaza is that little strip on the southwestern side. And so he's on his way down towards that. And he arose and went. Now, before I read this verse to you, I just want to say to you that every single phrase and word is extremely full of meaning. I want you to think about it yourself, and hopefully you'll be ahead of me before I say the things. So he's told to go down to Gaza, which is desert, and he arose and went. See the significance of that? He didn't say, well, I'll can I leave it a couple of weeks because I'm a bit busy, I've got other things to do. No, the Lord said to Philip, you need to get down to Gaza. So he arose and went. So he responded. There's an importance in that. And behold, a man of Ethiopia, a eunuch of great authority under Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, who had the charge of all her treasure and had come to Jerusalem for to worship. That verse, as I say, is full of meaning, and I'll just explain. I'll do it in reverse to a degree. What's a eunuch? Would anybody like to tell me what a eunuch is? No, I didn't think you would. So what about the phrase a man? A eunuch, by the way, is a man that doesn't think he's a man, possibly, that he has been castrated in one of a few different ways, either hopefully in his very early years. The particular words that are used to describe castration of that type were cut, crushing, or bruising. All right? All incredibly important words when we get to the book of Isaiah that we're going to get to in a bit. They were typically castrated, and that basically meant he would never have children, whatever happened in the rest of his life. They were typically castrated at a very early age, and the likelihood of survival from the operation was less than 50% survival. So more children, babies, died in the operation than survived. This bit will shock you. Well, if it doesn't, you must be asleep. It was against the law in the Roman Empire to castrate a boy. And yet there were remarkably quite a lot of boys that were castrated, because it gave them potentially a future that provided for their family, because they could get jobs that they couldn't get if they were a normal physical adult male when they grew up. Because they could work with, for example, here's one, queens. That the king didn't need to worry about the man that was working with the queen whilst he was away at war or doing whatever he did. You with me? Okay. He was a man of Ethiopia. Do you think he felt like a full man? Or a half man? If you think of the psychology of it, he's in an unusual position. He's in an unusual position that possibly we don't understand, but we're trying to understand. He's a man of Ethiopia. What's so significant of Ethiopia? He was supposed to be doing work he was up in Jerusalem. He's going towards Gaza. You've got a map out there. Where's Ethiopia? It's not in Jerusalem. It's not in Israel. So he's like a stranger. Okay. He's not from Israel. He's not from Jerusalem. And he's not even from Gaza. He's from Ethiopia. So he feels like an outsider. So he feels like an outsider and is made to feel like an outsider and is being castrated. Okay? What do you think he looked like? Do you think he looked like a Jew? No, he looked like an Ethiopian. And what do they look like? Well, they look different, don't they? Because they're black. So he was very different. So we read again, behold, a man of Ethiopia, an eunuch of great authority. Oh, he had a fantastic job. He's a man of great authority under Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, who had the charge of all her treasure. We would call that the Chancellor of the Exchequer, probably. And he was doing it for the queen. And the name of the queen was not, despite what it says there, her name was not Candace. That's a title. A bit like Pharaoh in Egypt. It's a name that was given to the queens. And most of the Candaces were military geniuses. The women led the battles to war. But that's beside the point. But that was his job. He was in charge of all of the money. He's from Ethiopia, etc. And he'd been to Jerusalem to worship. Now, again, I'll ask some rhetorical questions. If you're going to Jerusalem to worship, where's the one place that you think you really want to go to when you get to Jerusalem? Not Haifa football team. Where would you want to? You'd want to go to the temple, wouldn't you? Yeah. And which was the place he wasn't allowed to go to according to the law in Deuteronomy chapter 23? The temple. So he goes to Jerusalem to worship. The one place that he wants to go into is not allowed in because he was a eunuch. Deuteronomy 23, verse 1, it tells him that eunuchs can't. So he's a bit outside, isn't he? He's a bit different. Not only was it against the law in Roman Empire to castrate them, it did come back. Castration of young boys became very popular in the 60s, I believe, I'm not well up on music, in the 16th and 17th century, because women weren't allowed to perform. So in opera and things like that, all the voices were male, whether that be bass and tenor, but also alto and soprano. They were called the castrati. Listen carefully, the castrati. Okay. One famous opera singer, male castrati, has had his body exhumed, and they've tested his body and done DNA on him. And he had all sorts of problems. They can tell. He had brittle bone disease. Why? Well, when we get to a certain age, a little boy grows into a man, or a little girl grows into a woman, they go through puberty. But this lad would develop differently. His male hormones wouldn't be working properly, and he certainly didn't have the female hormones. So his body grows differently, and they were physically different. Not only was he black, not only was he from a foreign country, not only was he castrated, but physically he looked different. They are described as having chests like peacocks. Their bodies never stopped growing until the day they died. Their limbs never stopped growing until the day they died. In our firm, we used to have a customer who had a condition like that. He was not a castrati, but he had a problem with a pituitary gland in the front, a gland in the front of his brain, and he never stopped growing. He was 7'3" and taking drugs every day to try and stop his growth because it was killing him. And it did. This man never stopped growing. And Cassatelli in the coffin that was found, he'd not stopped growing. That's why he had brittle bone disease. So this man, as soon as anybody saw him in Israel, they knew he wasn't from the tribe of Levi or Judah or Benjamin or whatever, didn't they? They knew he was not a Jew. He couldn't sneak his way into the temple because he stood out like a sore thumb, as we might say. And then if he opened his mouth, what did he sound like? Well, it proves it all the more. You can't enter the temple. There's no way in. And he's there. So there we're back to the chapter, verse 28. He's returning. By the way, he's returning from Jerusalem after not being allowed in the temple, after trying to learn about the things of God, which he obviously did, and he just so happens to have a scroll. Now, you've got Bibles on your laps or whatever, and you open them just like turn over a page and it's a piece of cake. But he had a scroll. He didn't think, there weren't chapter divisions, by the way, but he didn't say, let's have a look at chapter 53 or 56 that we just read. He was reading, and he'd read a lot of it. He was returning and sitting in his chariot. When was the last time you got in the Chancellor of the Exchequer's car? Imagine if, I was going to say him, her in this case now. Imagine I'd love to have a chat with her. Oh, there's lots of things I'd like to have a chat with her. I'd like her to come to me for some financial advice, and I'll explain why certain things are going wrong in the country and charities are going to fall flat on their face because of the decisions she's made. Do you think I'd be allowed to get in her car? Well, this man is allowed to get in the chariot. Philip is allowed to get in the chariot. And he was reading verse 30, and Philip, the lover of horses, ran thither to him and heard him read the prophet Isaiah and said, Philip says to him, do you understand what you're reading? And this man of great power, the most important employee that the Queen, and Ethiopia was a wealthy country, by the way. Don't go think it was a nothing country. The most important employee in the whole of the country for the Queen has the humility to say, that's an important ingredient, how can I accept some man should help me? Now, I'm in Ormskirk. I know how brilliant they are in Ormskirk. And we're going to do a test in a minute. All of you, I'm going to go around one by one. You're going to tell me all the names of the kings of Israel in order. And then when you finish that, we're going to do all the kings of Judah in order. Then you're going to explain to me the book of Ezekiel or the book of Daniel or Chronicles. You wouldn't like that, would you? I'll just do it with you, Jill. You see how humility is very important. He's the Chancellor of the Exchequer. How can I? Help me. So he helps him. And he says, verse 31, how can I, except some man should guide me? And he desired Philip that he would come up and sit with him. Come on, come and sit with me in the chariot. I need your help. If you can help me, I want your help. Notice his enthusiasm for the word of God, but also his lack of understanding to a degree. He obviously has a good understanding of many things about the scriptures, but he needs help. I remember asking my dad a question once. I've mentioned before I was baptized when I was over tea, but I was baptized when I was here. But a few days before my interview, my dad said to me, son, he says, is there anything you want to discuss with me before you go for your interview? I said, I don't think so. I think I'll be all right. Oh, okay. I said, oh, hang on a minute, Dad. I've got something. She said, oh, what's that, son? I said, well, I'm a little bit confused. I do feel a bit daft because I've been to lectures all my life at the Homescope meeting. I said, but I'm a bit confused. What's the order of events that happens when Jesus returns? I thought I was asking a realistic question. It's not so straightforward, son. It's the most encouraging thing anybody's ever said to me. I thought, oh, wow, I thought it was just me that didn't know. Okay, that's good. But you need to ask the question, not that question. The problem that we have is many people don't get baptized, more than you could possibly imagine, because they don't ask the question. They think they're supposed to know everything. If that were the case, I wouldn't be baptized yet. They wouldn't have allowed me here. And they wouldn't now either. We have to have humility to ask the question. Can you help me? Okay? See what humility he had, the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And the place, verse 32, the place of the scripture which he read was this: he was led as a sheep to the slaughter, and like a lamb dumb before his shearer, so opened he not his mouth. In his humiliation his judgment was taken away. And who shall declare his generation? For his life is taken from the earth. Would anybody like to shout out where that's from? Or shall I sit down now? It's from Isaiah. And it's from Isaiah chapter 53. It's the most well-known passage in the Old Testament about the suffering of Jesus. Okay. And he wanted a help with it. He got to that. There was something about this part of the Bible that he was reading that was troubling him. And I don't think you know why it was troubling him. And I'd like to try and help you. Imagine you are an Ethiopian, a castrated man, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, with a body that is really bizarre, with a mouth that you don't like to speak because people laugh at you. Now let's read the passage again. The place of the scripture which you read was this: he was led as a sheep to the slaughter. Do you think a eunuch ever thought he'd been like a sheep led to the slaughter? Do you think 8-year-old or 6-month-old babies say, please, can you castrate me? I'm not cracking a joke here, but do you think a baby ever said, I'd like you to do that to me? Do you think he wanted that to happen to him? Do you think he'd have preferred an ordinary family life with a wife and children, or to be a eunuch and the Chancellor of the Exchequer? Which do you think he'd prefer to have? No wonder he stopped at this passage, because he felt like a sheep led to the slaughter, and like a lamb dumb before his shearer. Well, as a child, he wouldn't have been able to speak. And now he's older, he doesn't want to speak. So opened he not his mouth. In his humiliation, do you think he ever felt humiliated? Not half he did. Imagine all of those dinner parties that Candace would have and hundreds of visitors to the wealthy country, and they'd be there drinking the cocktails or whatever they did in them days, and suddenly he'd arrive and people would turn, oh, it's him, it's that funny one, it's that eunuch. Do you think he ever felt humiliated? Do you think he ever felt judged? Do you think he ever felt, it's a modern word, inadequate? I think he felt terribly inadequate. But there's something about this baptism that makes him feel an awful lot better. In his humiliation, his judgment was taken away. And who shall declare his generation? Oh, we even know he can't have children. It's not funny, is it? No wonder he focused on this little bit. Anyway, the eunuch answered Philip, verse 34, and said, I pray thee, of whom speaketh the prophet this, of himself or of some other man? Who's he writing about? And Philip opened his mouth and began, please follow with me if you're not already, because I want to just do something in a second. Then Philip opened his mouth and began at the same scripture and preached unto him Jesus. And as they went on their way, they came to a certain water, and Philip said, don't you think it's time you were baptized? Have I misquoted anything there? Doesn't say that at all, does it? Does not say that at all. As they went on the way, they came to a certain water, and the eunuch said, see, here is water. What doth hinder me to be baptized? First of all, notice it was him that asked for it, not Philip that said it's time he got in that water. Okay? Lesson for all of us. But there's another point I want to make. He's just come back from Jerusalem where he wasn't allowed in the temple. He wasn't allowed to do this. He wasn't allowed to do that. He wasn't allowed to do this, that, and the other because he's an Ethiopian eunuch man from another country that just doesn't fit the bill. And then he says, look, there's some water here. What hinders me from being baptized? What is it? There must be something because everything else I do, I'm not allowed to do it. And Philip says, well, you can if you know the prophets of Israel and Judah. You understand Daniel and Revelation and know. No, he didn't say that, does he? He said, what did he say? If thou believest with all thine heart, you may. Now, I think this man knew quite a bit about the Bible. I think he was quite knowledgeable. But it was his heart that he needed to just understand and then make the request. If thou believest with all thine heart thou mayest. And he answered and said, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And he commanded the chariot to stand still, and they went down both into the water, both Philip and the eunuch. And he baptized him. And when they were come out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord caught away Philip, that the eunuch saw him no more. And he went on his way rejoicing. Who went on his way rejoicing, Philip or the Ethiopian eunuch? I think it means the Ethiopian went on his way rejoicing. Why did he go on his way rejoicing? Was he rejoicing because Philip had left him? No, he was rejoicing because he realized what he'd just done. He's just been associating himself with something better. Come with me back to Isaiah then, please. You know we've nearly finished when we get to chapter 56. And that will be very soon. Chapter 53, just to link, it's a longer passage which I won't go through, but just to link with what we've just read in Acts. Verse 6 for introduction. All we like sheep have gone astray, we have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is dumb, so he openeth not his mouth. And that was what we ended with the talk this morning for those if you were here. But ultimately this is about Jesus, and Jesus went through all sorts of humiliation and judgment and criticism, even of his own family. We know from the Psalms that he was considered to be an alien or an outsider from even inside his own family. It wasn't just the leaders of the land that despised him. It was his own family that despised him too. It was an extreme embarrassment to everybody, more or less. And then we read on verse 8, he was taken from prison and from judgment, and who shall declare his generation? who are the family? That's what it's saying. Who will say who his family are? Because he was cut off from the land of the living. He would have no natural family. But of course, Jesus has lots of natural family, doesn't he? By baptism. By baptism, we associate ourselves to Jesus and we become part of his family. Behold, what manner of love the Father God has bestowed upon us that we should be called the children of God. 1 John chapter 3. We are associated with Jesus by baptism, and that's how we are his family. That's what the scriptures teach us. But going on in verse 10, which we don't tend to read much, but yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. God was pleased to bruise Jesus because it would fulfill his purpose that a people by faith would come to God and worship him. That Jesus was going to be the perfect one to do that for him, and it pleased God, even though no doubt it hurt God, but he knew the end from the beginning. It pleased God to bruise him, to bring him through this process, and the Ethiopian was thinking, well, I'm pleased that he went through with it, because through his work, I can be part of the family. Now, if you were here this morning, I quoted Isaiah 42. And when Matthew quotes it in the New Testament, he adds one sentence after the quote, behold my servant. He adds one sentence. In his name shall the Gentiles, and that's you and me, trust. Everybody, even an Ethiopian. Now come with me to chapter 56 of Isaiah, please. I think this is a really exciting chapter, but then again, that might be just me. But I'd like you to read it. We'll read it together and read it again, but imagine you're the Ethiopian eunuch. There's no way in a million years, by the way, that the Ethiopian eunuch read all of the 66 chapters as we have. He wouldn't have got to chapter 53 and stopped. He'd have read the rest of it. In our Bibles, the next chapter 54, verse 1, it says, sing, O barren, thou that didst not bear. Those of you who think you've got no children, don't worry, you've got plenty of children if you're part of the family of God. That's what it's saying. And in fact, chapter 56, these dry words, which are incredibly exciting. Thus saith the Lord, keep ye judgment and do justice, for my salvation is near to come, and my righteousness to be revealed. Blessed is the man that doeth this. Well, he did do it, didn't he? The Ethiopian eunuch did judgment and justice. Do you think he was an honest Chancellor of the Exchequer or a dishonest Chancellor of the Exchequer? Do you think his judgment with money was reasonable, or do you think it was corrupt? I think we know what type of a man he was. Verse 3. Neither let the son of the stranger, oh, well, that's you and me and those from Ethiopia, neither let the son of the stranger that joined himself to the Lord speak, saying, the Lord hath utterly separated me from his people. Don't ever say you can't be part of the family of God because you're not from there, or you're not from there, or not like this, or not like that. That God doesn't work that way. God works with people who are prepared to listen and be humble. Carrying on. Neither let the eunuch say, is a strange phrase this, I'd like you just to pause and you think about it. Neither let the eunuch say, behold, I am a dry tree. When I was a little boy, we moved house from, if you know where I'm talking about, Holborn Hill to High Moss. We had a brand new house, but in the house the garden was sort of wasteland really, and there was one tree in it, and it was an apple tree. And my dad says, that's right in the middle of the garden. I'm not so sure I want to keep that. I've cut that down next year when it comes to spring. And then it was full of blossom, and I've never seen so many apples in all my life. And we kept it. There's no point. You don't plant an apple tree because you want to look at the blossom. If you do, you're a bit daft, because if it's windy, it doesn't last long. Don't let the eunuch say, behold, I can't bear fruit. Because we can all bear fruit from a part of the family of God. That's what it's saying. Thus saith the Lord unto the eunuchs that keep my Sabbaths, and choose the things that please me, and take hold of my covenant, Now I'm going to read this badly again, as I did this morning. Even unto them will I give in mine house and within my walls a place and a name better than of sons and of daughters, and I will give them an everlasting name that shall not be cut off. What could the Ethiopian eunuch not do? He could not go into the temple of God. Deuteronomy chapter 3, 23, verse 1. It was against the law. Even unto them will I give in my house and within my walls a place and a name better than of sons and of daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that shall not be cut off. Just think about a castrated man. Do you think the phrase cut off meant anything to him? His future's no longer cut off because he's associated himself through his humility and his faith with the Lord Jesus Christ. Also the sons of the stranger that join themselves to the Lord to serve him and to love the name of the Lord, to be his servants. Every one that keepeth the Sabbath from polluting it and taketh hold of my covenant, even them will I bring to my holy mountain, and I will make them joyful in my house of prayer. My dear friends, the Ethiopian eunuch was not full of joy purely because he'd been baptized. That's just forgive me for saying this, that's just a transaction. It's just a proof. He was overcome with joy because he now knows he's not only associated himself with Jesus through baptism, but he knows he's going to go to the temple and meet Jesus in the temple, face to face. It should be called a house of prayer for all nations, not just for the Jews. Anybody that knows that they are imperfect, and I think that's why we don't get the name of the Ethiopian eunuch. He's not just a real human being as he was. He is representative of all of us. If we acknowledge that we're not perfect, if we acknowledge that we have all sorts of problems, but we associate ourselves with Jesus, then there's a kingdom to come. I'll finish there, but I just want to say one thing, and this is made up. When Israel got their land back in 1948, where did the planes come from? Well, they met all over the world, didn't they? If you remember, you won't remember, but if you read about it. The two main places that people came from initially were Russia and Ethiopia. I suggest to you that Ethiopian eunuch was a jolly good preacher. When he went back to the Queen to do his job, she'd have said something. Let's assume the Queen had a deep voice and he had a high-pitched voice, just for easy following. She said to him something like, "Have you been to Jerusalem then?" "Yes." "And what did you find out?" "Well, I've got a tremendous hope. You've got nothing. I've got everything." "What?" "Can I show you?" The Ethiopians associated themselves with the gospel and with the things of Israel, and that's why he went in the first place, because of the long-term links with the Ethiopian Israel. But he wanted something better, and he got it. And in 1948, there were loads of Ethiopians. That's why you see, strangely, black Jews, because they're from the Ethiopians. And you know what? There's spiritual Jews from Ormskirk as well. And Yorkshire even, and Persia, even Liverpool, because we're all part of the house of God. Because we all know we are nothing unless we associate ourselves with the man which is the Son of God, who laid down his life for his friends. And we are his friends if we do those things that he commanded us.